finally happened, and there's a lot of info to cover here. So, the previously leaked 2024 Sonic release, Sonic X Shadow Generations, has been officially announced, and immediately I can already hear the hordes of Sonatto fangirls foaming at the mouth over the title alone. Now, while Sonic Team is preparing for their next mainline Sonic game release, we will be getting a bunch of new content in the legacy format of Generations, but with lots of new mechanics and gameplay styles, even including a more adventure-era styled section. And I'm also going to be covering all the gameplay tweaks and improvements that Sega's putting into this. Now, because of the hilariously bad fumble known as Sonic Colors Ultimate, this was done in-house. Because of that, there's also a lot of interesting bits of lore and story that they're now able to include, something that's hinted by the official PlayStation blog post that was put out just a little bit after the trailer, giving some more details and hints to the story going on here, which the biggest part being how this game is going to specifically touch on Shadow's past and answer a bunch of previously unsolved story beats that Sega kind of left open and did nothing with. I'm also going to be covering the leaks that are now triple confirmed with this announcement, which go over the details for a Sonic 2024 game and how a bunch of sources, the most prominent one being Zippo and another guy named King Gronk Nick. And what's interesting with him is he's actually never gotten a leak wrong in his entire career. And as we can now confirm with this trailer, he didn't get this one wrong either. So some interesting information with that too. Now lastly, after going over all the new stuff being added to Generations in this remaster, I want to cover some of the discourse around this, because while many are saying Generations is the last title they'd want Sega to give the remaster treatment to, it actually makes perfect sense when you see their own reasonings behind the decision. So a huge video with tons to cover, but on the download, just keeping it 100, no cap. Do me a solid and hit that like doohickey down there, as it not only helps you see more of my banger content, but it also spreads my video to more people, helping save the masses from their insufficient and meaningless lives with news content about a sassy blue rodent delivered by a sassy gray rodent. Okay, but seriously, please like and subscribe. I'm getting desperate, man. Okay, now with the shilling over, let's get into the beginning of this story. First, I want to cover the actual announcement itself and all the official info Sega's put out before we get into the leaks that have mentioned this. Go! So, on January 31st, at a State of Play, Sony and Sega officially showed off the long-rumored Sonic Generations remaster that, if you remember, first got leaked via URL from the website of a German dubbing company that worked on Sonic Colors Ultimate. And it was in that leak that people noticed the URL had Generations Remaster in it, thus beginning the speculation if a Sonic Generations remaster was in the works, which we now know it was real and in the works. But with this initial URL sighting, the entire community was fretting and panicking that Blind Squirrel was about to be behind it, as they are the developers behind Sonic Colors Ultimate, so it only made sense they were leading this Generations project too. However, it's not clear if they were always planned to do just the one project with Colors Ultimate, or the other, more likely scenario, that Sega yanked Blind Squirrel away from this project after their infamous fumble. And I know, it sounds like I'm dogging on Colors Ultimate a lot, but yeah, even the audio in that game was messed up so badly with panning and volume issues that instead of going in and fixing them, they eventually just made the whole game's audio mono, meaning there's not only no difference in the left or right audio tracks throughout the whole thing, but this also affects the game's music too. So yes, I'm a little critical of Blind Squirrel, but at the same time, they really are the cartoon villains of the video games industry, and it's not even just Sonic they've done this to. However, to move past that, as that's not the focus of this video, with the Sonic X Shadow Generations trailer, we see a lot of teases of what's going to be a major part of this release, and all the story and gameplay changes that only an internal team at Sega could pull off, or at the very least, they're the only team that would get this level of clearance to clarify and touch up on so much of Shadow's past and other story elements from the Sonic universe. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Where this comes from about Shadow's past is specifically written on the PlayStation blog by Sega's own PR, which among other information reads, quote, Sonic X Shadow Generations also introduces an all-new standalone campaign for Shadow the Hedgehog, making this the definitive blend of classic Sonic, modern Sonic, and Shadow gameplay, which the official website also clarifies this is a story campaign, meaning the story here is going to be much more than just Sonic Generations with Shadow and new levels, but there's also going to be an entirely different gameplay style that we'll get into. But to stay on the topic of the story, the PlayStation blog also writes, players will dive into Shadow's dark past to understand his motivations and learn more about him as a character, to which even Takashi Iizuka, the series producer who now serves as basically the public figure for Sega and the direction of their future projects, and he writes, with Shadow's portion of the title, players will get to know him more as a character and understand his motivations. It will create the ultimate celebration fusion of classic Sonic, modern Sonic, and Shadow gameplay that all fans will surely enjoy. Boy, I sure love PR speak. But to look at some of the things in the trailer itself and the screenshots posted by the PlayStation blog, in this announcement trailer, which, while is plainly telling us very little, shows a lot of glimpses of some really interesting bits. The first one I want to mention is the inclusion of Doom's Eye, as well as the Black Arms as a whole, which are the basically forgotten alien race from Sonic. Now, coincidentally, this was one of the things we discussed in my most recent video on the Knuckles and Sonic 3 animatics, but the Black Arms are not the alien race in the movie universe, so with that also being one of the main drivers for having a Sonic and Shadow focused game out a little bit before the release of Sonic Movie 3, it seems like a bold choice for them to bring him back here. However, I also think this game is going to serve as a digestible way to get Shadow's lore and backstory without having to play and complete Sonic Adventure 2, Heroes, and Shadow 05. Now, with the respective excerpts from Iizuka and Sega's PR statement on the PlayStation blog, it's safe to assume that this game will not just be going over and recapping Shadow's past, but is also going to be adding to it and wrapping up a bunch of these plot lines that Sega's straight up abandoned, such as the Black Arms, or Maria, or even the plethora of Shadow clones that Sega has just never talked about again. This game even seems like a really good way for Sega to right a lot of their wrongs they've done the past few years with Shadow's character. And it's smart because all this old lore is bringing in new fans who have never seen it before, but to add more value, there's also additions and changes to bring in the older fans, which is also really going to help boost this game's sales, alongside the real juicer of Sonic Movie 3's release at the end of the year. Not to even mention that Generations is one of the most beloved Sonic titles and is already a loved PC port too. So no matter what happens, it would be really hard for Sega to screw this one up, but just give them time, they'll find a way. However, speaking on things we can tangibly see with our fragile little squish balls, one that popped out immediately to me, and is also one of the longest scenes from the trailer, is the level and cutscene transition where Shadow's running through these trippy hallways that are moving with him, and it opens up and throws him into Westopolis, which the cinematics for this also look really good. And this might come off as a hot take, I'm not sure, but the CG animatics here actually look better than Frontiers, I'd say. We also see a bit of Final Rush here as well, which is probably one of the best levels in SA2, and with Generations' much simpler and fluid rail system, this would be really exciting to have officially in this remaster. Also, before comments get on me, I know it's Final Rush's Sonic's version, Shadows has a different name, I just don't know it. Another part that's really interesting, perhaps the most interesting, is this short section where he's moving around, but not in the typical boost formula. He's also attacking and doing the teleporting flying ground thing that he does in the opening cutscene for Shadow 05, and it's assumed this is his homing attack, but only for when interacting with enemies. Something I think is actually really cool. But what's most interesting here is the movement being far different than the rest of Generations, and even from the rest of Shadow's levels in the trailer. While this game definitely features a boost, Shadow's levels do seem like a hybrid between Generations and Frontiers, with the way he's able to run around more freely here, and isn't just moving left and right while going straight. A format that's essentially just an advanced version of Temple Run. So it's not going to be like full adventure controls or anything like that, but still does seem to be more freedom than the typical boost formula. Not Frontiers level of hybrid, but probably close to it. Now, we only see it for a short glimpse, but we also see a boss fight with the Bio-Lizard, and it even has a bunch of different QuickTime events similar to the Frontiers Titans, as well as the Bio-Lizard here has at least 2 forms, and that's just one boss fight. So it's going to be exciting to see what else they're cooking with this. Another thing that was mentioned is the base game of Sonic Generations is also going to be receiving some bonus content in the remaster. Although, I always like to keep it realistic and make sure to not overhype things with you guys, so as a disclaimer, I have to mention that it's likely these new additions to the base game will just be cosmetics and maybe some additional music or some stuff like that. I personally don't think there's going to be new Sonic levels. However, it does mention that Sonic and Shadow's story crosses over with one another, so it's very possible, I'd even say likely, that the final boss will be both Sonic and Shadow gameplay, potentially even Super Shadow and Super Sonic. But that part's neither here nor there, since that's just speculation on my part. Now, what isn't speculation is the now almost certainly real leak, which is despite many big sources claiming they epically debunked it Reddit Chungus style, despite a lot of evidence that this is legit and none really that it isn't, which the announcement of this game is the final mark to confirm this is certainly legitimate. So to start from the top, it all began when an internal meeting PDF got leaked from Sega's licensing director, Anule Sai, who, according to only her Sonic fan wiki, is now a former licensing director at that. What's worth mentioning is this is a really obscure figure for someone to fake, as well as this being from her official Sega Cloud email, all which was grabbed due to some 4chan R9K troopers that found the URL via mysterious and probably unethical means. I even opened the direct URL and verified myself that the name does line up with the real licensing director. However, there is one smaller spelling inconsistency, but it's also not clear if it's the document that's misspelled or even the wiki, as whoever wrote this article is completely anonymous and they might just be totally dumb. Wait, a Sonic fan being dumb? No, impossible. Now, the only parts in this leak even worth covering are the mentions of a yet to be announced mobile title at the time, which we now know is Dream Team, as well as a new console Sonic release in 2024, and with it clearly not being a mainline Sonic Team release. However, it is assumed one of these two console games is going to be made by the main Sonic team, but as of this one, it was very clear it's going to be either a game by an entirely different, disconnected studio, that or a remake/remaster, which of course we now know the 2024 release was obviously Sonic X Shadow. Granted, there is rumors of another game, and it is being pushed by Zippo. We'll go into that later because it's kind of interesting, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. But in terms of this leak, since this came out in July of last year, it was a pretty big deal. It not only got both of these projects correct, but also at a time when a lot of people didn't think there was going to be a 2024 game. Now, this leak didn't get covered by a lot of people, and I have to address the criticism about this, but a lot of people were kind of missing the point entirely with this situation. Now, almost everyone jumped on and was quick to claim the PDF was epically science upvote fact-checked, simply because Sonic Dream Team was released, when in reality, that game's release did the exact opposite of debunking. If you check the roadmap that the PDF included, it did in fact state that a Sonic mobile game was coming. However, it was set to be in spring, and as we know, released in winter. And while yes, not all of the dates listed may be 100% accurate, they're for the most part all pretty close, and the actual releases themselves have now all turned out to be real. Also, if you think about it for more than 2 seconds, the dates for this in no way means the PDF is fake, considering that it was only meant to be spread around internally over at Sega's marketing and licensing department, solely to get a basic window for releasing toys, which if you're one of those type of man-children, you already know the toys released before, during, and a bit after the piece of media releases, as that's when the hype is the most to sell toys for the franchise they're piggybacking off of. Especially when you consider it's from July, this just means that everything shown in their licensing presentation was still being worked on and switched around depending on what's most convenient and beneficial for the Sonic brand, especially considering that Knuckles was officially announced to the public, but yet 2023 is coming and gone with quite literally not a drop of any official material. Like, there hasn't even been an interview talking about this show. So I definitely do believe that this leak is real, especially with this remaster's announcement. Now, I'm not saying this is 100% confirmed or anything like that. And also, while there isn't a ton of evidence towards this leak, other than the games now being announced, at the same time, there also isn't really any evidence against it. So I find it really weird that so many people are going out to call it fake, when there's no evidence of that. I just see people being snarky with Sonic Dream Team release and going,
"See, bucko, maybe you should think twice about covering leaks that hurt the corporate brand I'm currently salivating all over the boots of."
When in reality, I agree with them, and you definitely should not cover every leak, as I actually haven't even endorsed that many in my entire career, which, by the way, you can even go back and look at. And every leak I've put faith into and I said was legit has always came true and manifested itself. So I think leaks are totally fine to cover. The only responsibility is to both not spread and push leaks you know are fake, but also not spread things that include employees or any individual involves private information. Beyond that, everything else is fair game, and if people want to dissect and break down whether a leak is real or not, then I think that's actually a net good, so people don't just believe and get overhyped over every single leak, most of which are fake. So when the entire community is coming together and saying, I think this might be legit, I don't know, maybe we should listen. Now, I'm not saying all this to stroke my ego, because I'm going to be real, I wasn't smart enough to cover this and ignored it solely because there is simply no clear definitive proof of its validity other than the author name, which isn't enough to make it worth covering. Regardless, to move from that leak onto where Zippo comes in, I first want to give a disclaimer and mention that while Zippo was mostly right here, minus the release date being the big one, it is quite important to keep in mind that quite literally everything Zippo has ever reported, and of course turned out to be real, was sourced from someone else before Zippo posted it, and he goes and takes the gamble, just confidently saying what, according to him, will certainly happen. However, when wrong, which is more often than not probably the case, he just sweeps it under the rug and completely ignores it. But that's okay. You know what? We still love you, Zippo. Mwah. Now, the reason I bring up this leak is the one huge mic drop line that he mentions at the end, and it reads, "And just to get ahead of all the speculation, no, this is not the Sonic/Shadow game I'm hearing about. That's a brand new game coming this holiday in time with the movie. That'll be announced later on this year. And I read this because I've also been hearing whispers behind the scenes about a Sonic and Shadow game coming out this year, but I'm kind of just assuming that was this release. However, according to Zippo, that is an entirely different, all-original game, which maybe this is tying into, as Kishimoto did say he wanted to make another Gen 2 game, which if you aren't aware, that's what he calls all the Boost games, that's Gen 2. And Kishimoto's statement could either be referring to the new original content in Generations Remastered or whatever. However, it could also be referring to this new unannounced game. Really, only time's going to tell on that though. Now again, Zippo doesn't have the most credible reputation. However, another leaker named King Gronk Nick, who I mentioned earlier, has a squeaky clean track record where he's yet to put out anything that hasn't come true. He's also gotten many state of plays correct, so when he said there are Sonic Generations with Shadow, that's when I started really believing this and going, oh, this might actually be real. Zippo, on the other hand, did get a couple things right, but again, they're all things King Gronk Nick hinted at. The only difference between their posts is Zippo also did get some of it wrong, despite how short of a post it was, so keep that in mind when going forward and seeing his leaks. Now, one thing I want to mention and cover is a lot of the more negative and critical feedback to this. Like, there's a ton of people mad at getting this game, most of which I obviously don't agree with, but for a lot of it, I can also understand where they're coming from. The biggest one I'm seeing is people want a lot of other Sonic games.
By the way, comment below which one you'd want remastered. Could be interesting.
But as a fan and consumer, I actually agree with these guys completely. Generations already exists on PC, has a vibrant mod community, and is a really good port. So I can already think of, like the top of my head, 10 other Sonic games that just aren't available. However, despite that, I actually think Generations is a perfect choice, not only because Sonic Colors Ultimate was timed to strategically be on the shelves for when Sonic Movie 2 hit theaters, but they're also doing something similar with this, just a lot better. Now, as we all know, a big focus of Sonic Movie 3 is going to be Shadow, and they definitely know the huge demand there will be for more of his character once the movie drops. So it does make sense for them to re-release one of the very few recent select Sonic titles that's an almost objectively really good game. Just like how Super Mario 3D Land and Bowser's Fury did, this release also brings a demand from us Sonic fans who have likely already played or beaten the base game, so there really is a little something for everyone. Now, while Unleashed on PC would definitely feel much more of a missing puzzle piece for the franchise, with its Werehog story having no relevancy in any lore, as well as the gameplay for those sections being just okay. While unanimously, the gameplay for Sonic's day stages are what makes the game so memorable, and it's the sole reason people have come back and said,
hey, the Werehog stages aren't that bad. They're not that bad.
Listen, there's like 8 billion games that do combat better. If it weren't for those day stages, you would not be playing this game again, let's be real. Not to mention the fact Unleash has an entire lack of any Shadow, and it wouldn't even make sense to add him since the levels aren't explicitly themed after Sonic, but rather is them traveling the globe going to a bunch of different locations based on real countries. I mean, I guess we could see Shadow in Mexico getting a spicy Latina yacht. I guess that would be cool.
I just love Latina Sonic.
Now, for a nostalgia-based game, adding Shadow, who's been lacking playability for so long now, will also be a good opportunity to do more obscure levels and aspects of Shadow's past, which wouldn't make sense to do in literally any other game than an entirely new solo Shadow game. Something that could happen again, but its future definitely depends on the reception of this remaster. I wrote this all in a few hours, and I think I covered everything, but it's 3 a.m. just at the time of writing this. Geez, I'm finishing up recording. It's just hit 5. Nevertheless, all the editing I'm about to have to put into this, so I'm downright exhausted, but it's worth it for you guys. Like the video if you liked it, really helps out ya boy, and make sure you're actively and currently subscribed to the #1 source of Sonic news. That's right, 2024, we're bringing the catchphrase back. Oh, also join my Discord as I check in there decently frequently and pop in and talk and conversate. I'm going to promote my old phone number again next video, but for now, if you already have it or can find it in an old video, text me the name of your favorite fruit and I will forever know you're a real OG from before I became a decently large-sized channel, at least in the terms of Sonic. And you're not just some dirty bandwagon hopper trying to hop on my bandwagon. Don't hop on my wagon. Anyways, I'm delusional. That's all. Lots of love, and peace be among ye. Peace be among ye!
She got me still,